Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating 3,000-year history that has profoundly shaped a very complex modern identity. We're looking at Tunisia, a nation sitting right at the geographic and cultural crossroads of the Mediterranean. By tracking its incredibly rich past, we're going to understand exactly why this country has faced such intense post-revolution struggles in recent years. So let's start with a bit of a central mystery, right? Back in 2011, Tunisia pulled off this historic democratic revolution. They successfully ousted an authoritarian regime and literally sparked the broader Arab Spring. Yet, well over a decade later, why is this nation struggling so deeply with who it fundamentally is? Why is a country that successfully transitioned to democracy dealing with such intense internal polarization today?
Well, the source material brings up this absolutely brilliant analogy to explain it. Trying to understand Tunisian identity is literally like opening up a Russian matryoshka doll. On the outside, it looks finely crafted with this modern, cosmopolitan surface. But as you open it up, you find these massive, profound layers of history hidden right beneath. Layers of ancient empires, colonial trauma, and heavily enforced identities. To really understand the Tunisia of today, we have to unpack these dolls one by one.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for unpacking those layers. We'll start with the modern identity crisis, then travel back to the crossroads of ancient empires, move through the French protectorate, look at independence and dictatorship, and finally arrive at the Jasmine Revolution.
Part 1. The Modern Identity Crisis. To really get a handle on this, we actually need to look at the present day first and see the friction tearing at the fabric of post-revolution Tunisia.
Right now, the political polarization in Tunisia basically comes down to two fiercely competing narratives identified in our sources. On one side, you've got the Crucible narrative, which is largely adopted by Islamist parties like Ennahda. This view sees Tunisia as fundamentally part of the Islamic and Arab world, arguing that its true identity was forcibly disrupted by Western colonialism. On the flip side is the Aquarium narrative, championed by secularist and nationalist parties like Nida Tounes. They view Tunisia as this secular, cosmopolitan blend of Mediterranean and European principles. And listen, neither side is definitively right or wrong in our analysis here. These are simply the two major lenses through which Tunisians are actively debating their future.
Moving on to Part 2, Crossroads of Ancient Empires. To figure out exactly how we got these two completely different modern viewpoints, we've got to rapidly peel back that 3,000-year-old historical matryoshka doll.
The sheer density of this history is just wild. We're talking the 9th century BCE, when the Phoenicians founded Carthage. And actually, fun fact, Carthage grew so incredibly powerful it nearly wiped out Rome before eventually falling. Then, in 146 BCE, the Romans conquer and rebuild it, turning it into a crucial hub of their African province. Fast forward to 670 AD, Arab conquerors arrive, bringing Islam and establishing Kairouan. Finally, in 1574, the Ottoman Empire incorporates Tunisia. Every single one of these massive shifts left an indelible cultural, linguistic, and architectural mark on this vital Mediterranean thoroughfare.
So the big takeaway here is that instead of just erasing the culture that came before it entirely, these eras compounded. They stacked together to forge a uniquely diverse identity, a true melting pot, shaping an African-Mediterranean, Arab-Atlantic identity. It created an incredibly rich, albeit complex cultural baseline that was suddenly totally challenged in the late 19th century.
Which brings us to Part 3, the French protectorate. Because this next layer of our doll represents a massive, traumatic disruption in Tunisia's historic identity. Picture this. It's 1881, and facing mounting unrest in debt, the ruler of Tunis unwittingly signs Tunisia's colonial birth certificate through the Treaty of Bordeaux. This agreement establishes a formal French protectorate. The local ruler, the Bey, was left as a puppet with only nominal sovereignty, while France swooped in and took absolute control over the government, the military, the police, and all the revenue. It sparked this long era of colonial exploitation and deep cultural humiliation.
And the impact on the ground? It was absolutely severe. The French took direct control of public works. They completely reorganized agriculture to prioritize large-scale cash crops, which actively dispossessed local Tunisian landowners. On top of that, the heavy-handed imposition of the French language and cultural norms seriously marginalized the native population. This approach sparked the first major modern identity fracture, pushing resistance movements to fuse Tunisian nationalism with their Islamic roots, just as a way to fight back against these foreign cultural imports.
Moving right into Part 4, Independence and Dictatorship.
Following that intense, deep-seated resistance, the newly sovereign state decided it was going to mold the Tunisian identity aggressively from the top down.
After decades of struggle, Tunisia finally wins its independence in 1956. Nationalist leader Habib Bourguiba takes power, abolishes the monarchy, and establishes a brand new, strictly secular republic. But here's the catch. The way he chose to govern absolutely set the stage for the crisis we are seeing today.
Under Bourguiba and later his successor Ben Ali, the state essentially tried to force a very specific identity onto the population. They pushed hard for rapid westernization and strict secularism. To pull this off, they actively rejected the country's Ottoman and Islamic past, forcing the displacement of traditional customs, like treating the veil as totally incompatible with their vision of a modern state. This unified identity wasn't up for debate either. It was enforced through heavy censorship and violent repression of any political or religious dissent.
Following Bourguiba, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali ruled with an absolute iron fist. For 23 years, he systematically stripped away political freedoms and modified public perceptions through widespread fear, patronage networks, and systemic censorship. The state completely owned the public space, and the population suffered in silence.
Part 5. The Jasmine Revolution. This brings us right up to the breaking point of that authoritarian shell, the exact moment the outer layer of the Matryoshka doll finally cracked in late 2010.
The Jasmine Revolution, fueled by staggering unemployment, systemic corruption, and tragically sparked by the self-immolation of a desperate street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi, a massive wave of grassroots protests erupted. The citizens of Tunisia, who had been silenced for decades, flooded the streets. By January 2011, this mass uprising finally shattered the regime, forcing Ben Ali to flee the country and igniting the Arab Spring across the entire region.
Now, you really have to look at the demographics here to grasp why this happened. Youth make up a staggering 40% of the Tunisian population, almost half the country. Their deep disenfranchisement, a total lack of opportunity, and intense alienation from a state that just ignored them. That was the ultimate catalyst for change. The youth demanded dignity and a future.
But today, the reality of that democratic transition is incredibly heavy. We're talking 500,000 new arrivals entering a largely stagnant labor market every single year, 500,000 people. When you combine this massive influx of job seekers with a struggling economy and a long history of regional inequalities, you create a real vacuum of despair. And unfortunately, that's exactly the kind of vacuum where radical groups and extreme political polarization can easily take root.
So, the 2011 revolution successfully removed the dictator, right? But in doing so, it basically popped that Russian doll wide open. All those deep, historic, suppressed components of Tunisian identity, the Islamic, the Arab, the Mediterranean, the secular, were suddenly scattered out on the table, freed from censorship, and are now fiercely competing to define the new nation.
Every single era we've talked about contributed directly to the polarized political landscape Tunisia navigates today. Think about it. The ancient era left deep Mediterranean ties. The Arab and Ottoman periods cemented profound Islamic roots. The French protectorate introduced a very secular administration, and the post-independence dictatorship brutally enforced a rigid westernization. All of these legacies are valid, historically accurate parts of Tunisia's history, but they are clashing intensely in the present.
So the crucial question we are left with is this. How does a nation with 3,000 years of history actually piece together these incredible, contradictory layers of identity to rebuild its future? Can a nation so incredibly rich in diverse history find a new social contract that honors all its parts without tearing itself apart in the process? It's a monumental challenge for sure, and the answer to that question is going to determine the survival of one of the Arab Spring's most fragile democracies. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what lies beneath the surface.